The acrid stench of smoke clung to Lyra Blackthorn's hair as she stood atop the ruined walls of her family's once proud keep. Flames still licked at the stones of the great hall, devouring tapestries and heirlooms that had survived centuries. But it wasn't the loss of material wealth that brought tears to her storm-grey eyes. It was the knowledge that her entire world had crumbled in a single night. House Blackthorn, once respected throughout the Five Kingdoms for their mastery of diplomacy and their rumoured mystical bloodline, was no more. Lyra's father, Lord Cedric, lay dead in the courtyard below, his life's blood seeping into the earth. Her mother and younger brother had vanished in the chaos, their fates unknown. As the last embers of her childhood home flickered in the pre-dawn light, Lyra clutched a small, leather-bound tome to her chest. It was the only thing she had managed to salvage from her father's secret study, a room she had been forbidden to enter until this very night. "My dear," Lord Cedric had whispered, his life ebbing away as Lyra cradled his head. "The vault, behind the serpent's tongue, our legacy, our curse, you must." Those were his final words, cut short by a rattling gasp as death claimed him. Lyra had barely time to slip into the hidden chamber and retrieve the book before the attacking forces of House Silverspire breached the inner walls. Now, as she stood alone among the ruins, Lyra opened the tome with trembling hands. Its pages were filled with intricate diagrams, arcane symbols, and text written in a language she had never seen before. Yet, as her eyes traced the strange letters, understanding blossomed in her mind like unfurling shadows. This was no ordinary book. It was a grimoire, a repository of magical knowledge that had been passed down through generations of Blackthorns. Magic, the very art that had been outlawed and purged from the Five Kingdoms for over a century. A chill ran down Lyra's spine as realization dawned. This was why House Silverspire had struck with such sudden, merciless force. This was why the royal banners of House Ironhold flew alongside the Silverspire falcon. Her family had been keeping secrets that could topple kingdoms. In the distance, Lyra could hear the approach of horses. The victors would soon return to survey the spoils of their treachery. Her grip tightened on the grimoire as a cold resolve settled in her heart. She would survive. She would learn. And one day she would return to claim what was rightfully hers. With one last look at the smouldering ruins of her past, Lyra Blackthorn slipped into the shadows of the forest. The first rays of sunlight pierced the canopy, illuminating the ash that clung to her once fine clothes. As she moved silently through the underbrush, a whisper of wind seemed to caress her cheek, carrying with it the faintest hint of a voice. "Rise, child of ash and ember. Your reign begins in fire." 5 years passed like a fever dream. Lyra wandered the fringes of society, her noble bearing carefully hidden beneath layers of grime and rough-spun cloth. She took odd jobs in taverns, stables, and merchant caravans, always moving, always watching, always learning. By night, she pored over the grimoire, its secrets slowly unfurling in her mind like smoke. It was in a squalid alleyway in the port city of Ravenhold that Lyra's life changed once again. A group of drunken soldiers, their tabards bearing the Silverspire falcon, had cornered a young street urchin. The boy's eyes were wide with terror as the men laughed and drew their blades. Lyra's hand moved of its own accord, fingers tracing a symbol in the air. The words spilled from her lips in a language older than the kingdoms themselves. Suddenly, the alley plunged into an unnatural darkness. The soldiers cried out in confusion and fear, their weapons clattering to the cobblestones. When the darkness lifted, Lyra stood alone with the wide-eyed boy. The soldiers lay unconscious, their minds filled with nightmares they would never fully remember. "Who? What are you?" the boy whispered, awe and fear mingling in his voice. Lyra knelt before him, her eyes burning with an inner fire. "I am Lyra of House Blackthorn, and I need your help." The boy's name was Tomas, and he proved to be a wellspring of information. Through him, Lyra learned of the changes that had swept through the Five Kingdoms. King Aldrich of House Ironhold had grown old and infirm, his grip on power weakening. The Order of the Burning Star, a fanatical religious sect dedicated to stamping out the last vestiges of magic, had risen to prominence. Most importantly, Tomas spoke of a grand tournament to be held in the capital city of Ironhold. Noble houses from across the realm would send their finest to compete for glory and the king's favor. It was to be a spectacle unlike any seen in a generation. It's the perfect opportunity, Lyra mused, her mind racing. A chance to infiltrate the court, to get close to those who destroyed my family. Tomas frowned. But how? You're supposed to be dead, and even if you weren't, House Blackthorn is disgraced. They'd never let you compete. A sly smile played across Lyra's lips. Then we'll have to give them someone else, won't we? Over the next months, Lyra and Tomas worked tirelessly. The young boy's network of street urchins and beggars proved invaluable, gathering scraps of information and rumor from every corner of the city. Lyra, for her part, delved deeper into the grimoire's teachings. She learned to bend shadows to her will, to whisper thoughts into unsuspecting minds, to craft illusions so real they could fool even the sharpest eyes. As the day of the tournament drew near, Lyra stood before a cracked mirror in their humble hideout. Gone was the ash-smeared fugitive. In her place stood Lady Area Nightshade, long-lost scion of a minor noble house from the far reaches of the kingdom. Her once dark hair now shimmered with strands of silver, her eyes a bewitching violet. "It's time," she said, her voice resonating with power and purpose. "Tomas, are you ready?" The boy, now dressed in the fine livery of a noble squire, nodded solemnly. "I am, my lady." As they stepped out into the bustling streets of Ravenhold, Lyra felt the weight of destiny settling upon her shoulders. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, hope burned brightly in her heart. House Blackthorn would rise again, and the 5 kingdoms would tremble at its ascension. Little did Lyra know that far to the north, beyond the great frost barrier, ancient eyes had opened, sensing the stirring of long-dormant magic. The Game of Thrones was about to become far more complicated than anyone could have imagined. The grand tournament of Ironhold was a riot of colour and pageantry. Banners from every corner of the 5 kingdoms fluttered in the breeze, and the air rang with the clash of steel and the roar of the crowd. Lyra, now fully embodying her persona as Lady Area Nightshade, sat astride a midnight black stallion at the edge of the tournament grounds. "My lady," Tomas whispered, his eyes darting nervously. "Are you certain about this? The competition looks fierce." Lyra's lips curled into a confident smile. "Fear not, dear Tomas. We didn't come this far to falter now." As they made their way to the registration pavilion, Lyra's keen eyes took in every detail. She noted the positioning of the guards, the whispered conversations between nobles, and most importantly, the dais where the royal family sat. King Aldrich looked every bit as frail as the rumours suggested, his rheumy eyes barely focusing on the spectacle before him. Beside him sat his son, Prince Darien, whose sharp gaze seemed to miss nothing. It was then that Lyra saw him Lord Cassius Silverspire, the man responsible for her family's downfall. He stood near the royal dais, resplendent in silver and blue, laughing at some jest. Lyra's hand tightened on the reins, her knuckles white with suppressed rage. "Lady Nightshade," the herald's voice snapped her back to the present. "Your credentials, please." With a flourish, Lyra produced the forged documents that had cost a small fortune in bribes and favours. The herald scrutinized them, his brow furrowing. For a heart-stopping moment, Lyra thought their ruse had been discovered. But then the man nodded, stamping the parchment with the royal seal. "Welcome to the grand tournament, Lady Nightshade. May the gods favour your blade." As Lyra guided her mount away, she caught sight of a commotion near the competitors' tents. A group of men wearing the sun and flame insignia of the Order of the Burning Star surrounded a young woman with fiery red hair. "We know what you are, witch," one of the men hissed. "Your kind has no place here." The woman stood her ground, green eyes flashing defiantly. "I have every right to compete, unless you're afraid a simple hedge which might best your vaunted champions." Lyra felt a tug of recognition. This woman had power, carefully hidden but unmistakable to one who knew how to look. Without thinking, she steered her horse towards the confrontation. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" Lyra's voice rang out, clear and authoritative. The leader of the group turned, his face twisting into a sneer. "This is none of your concern, my lady. Best move along." Lyra dismounted gracefully, her violet eyes never leaving the man's face. "I believe it is my concern when I see fellow competitors being harassed. Or does the order now dictate who may and may not participate in the king's tournament? A crowd had begun to gather, murmurs of interest rippling through the onlookers. Lyra could see uncertainty creeping into the order members' expression. They couldn't afford a scene, not with so many influential eyes watching. "We'll be watching you, Rowan," the man spat, before gesturing for his companions to withdraw. As the crowd dispersed, the red-haired woman turned to Lyra with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. "I appreciate the assistance, though I had the situation well in hand." Lyra inclined her head. "Of that I have no doubt. Lady Area Nightshade, at your service." "Rowan Thornheart," the woman replied. "I don't recall hearing of House Nightshade before." "We're a small house from the eastern marches," Lyra lied smoothly. "Tell me, Lady Thornheart, what brings you to this tournament? You don't strike me as one who seeks glory in the lists." Rowan's green eyes narrowed slightly. Curious words from one so eager to involve herself in the affairs of strangers. "Perhaps we both have our secrets, Lady Nightshade." A slow smile spread across Lyra's face. "Perhaps we do. I look forward to seeing you in the competition." As Lyra walked away, her mind raced with possibilities. Rowan Thornheart was clearly more than she appeared, and potentially a powerful ally or a dangerous enemy. One thing was certain. The grand tournament had just become far more interesting than Lyra had anticipated. Little did she know that high above in one of the castle's towers, a pair of cold blue eyes had been watching the entire exchange with great interest. Prince Darien leaned back from the window, a thoughtful expression on his face. "Captain," he called to his guard, "find out everything you can about this Lady Nightshade. I believe we have an unexpected player in our midst." The first day of the tournament dawned bright and clear. Lyra stood in her tent, methodically donning her armor with Thomas's assistance. Each piece was a work of art, black as night with silver filigree that seemed to dance in the lamplight. It had cost a fortune, but the effect was worth every coin Lady Area Nightshade would be impossible to ignore. "My lady," Thomas said hesitantly as he handed her the helm, "I've been hearing whispers. The prince has been asking questions about you." Lyra's eyes narrowed. "Expected, but sooner than I'd hoped. We'll have to accelerate our plans." She placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "Keep your ears open, Thomas. Every scrap of information could be vital." As Lyra emerged from her tent, the crowd's murmur grew. She cut an imposing figure, her armor gleaming in the sunlight. But it was the weapon at her side that drew the most attention, a slender longsword with a hilt wrapped in black leather, its pommel set with a large, smoky quartz. The sword was more than mere showmanship. Hidden within its core was a sliver of shadowglass, a rare material mentioned in her family's grimoire. It amplified her burgeoning magical abilities, allowing her to channel them with greater precision. The day's events began with archery, followed by tests of horsemanship. Lyra performed admirably, her years of noble training not entirely forgotten. But it was in the afternoon's sword bouts that she truly shone. Her first opponent was a burly knight from the western hills. He laughed when he saw her, clearly underestimating the slender woman before him. That laughter turned to shock as Lyra moved like smoke, her blade finding gaps in his defense with preternatural accuracy. The bout was over in moments. With each victory, Lyra felt the eyes of the court upon her. She reveled in it, knowing that every whisper, every speculative glance brought her closer to her goal. By day's end, Lady Area Nightshade was the talk of the tournament. As the sun began to set, Lyra made her way back to her tent. Her body ached from exertion, but her mind was racing with plans and possibilities. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the figure lurking in the shadows. "Impressive performance today, Lady Nightshade," a silky voice called out. "Or should I say, Lady Blackthorn?" Lyra froze, her hand instinctively moving to her sword. From the darkness emerged a man in elegant robes, his face hidden beneath a deep hood. Only his eyes were visible eyes that glowed with an unnatural amber light. "Who are you?" Lyra demanded, her voice low and dangerous. The man chuckled. "A friend, potentially. One who knows what it's like to hide in plain sight." He raised his hands, pushing back his hood to reveal a face that seemed to shift and change, never settling on a single appearance. They call me the Faceless One. I represent certain interests that find your presence here intriguing. Lyra's mind whirled. The Faceless One was a figure of legend, a shapeshifter said to move unseen through the highest echelons of power. What do you want? For now, nothing but a conversation. His ever-changing features settled into a warm smile. You're not the only one with a score to settle, my dear. The Order of the Burning Star has many enemies, and House Silverspire's rise has upset a delicate balance. We've been waiting for a catalyst, someone with the right combination of motive, means, and magic. And you think I'm that catalyst? Lyra asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. The Faceless One's smile widened. Oh, I know you are. The question is, are you ready to be? Before Lyra could respond, a commotion erupted from the main tournament grounds. Shouts and screams filled the air, followed by an otherworldly roar that made the very ground tremble. The Faceless One's expression turned grim. It would seem events are moving faster than anticipated. Choose wisely, Lady Blackthorn. The next few moments will determine not just your fate, but that of the entire realm. With that, he melted back into the shadows, leaving Lyra alone with the echoes of chaos growing ever louder. She gripped her sword tightly, feeling the pulse of magic within it. Whatever was happening, she knew one thing for certain: the game had changed, and there was no going back. Lyra raced towards the commotion, her heart pounding in her ears. As she reached the edge of the tournament grounds, the scene that greeted her was one of utter chaos. A massive creature, unlike anything she had ever seen, towered over the fleeing crowds. Its body was a twisted amalgamation of ice and flesh, with multiple limbs ending in wickedly sharp claws. A crown of jagged icicles adorned its misshapen head, and its roar sent shards of frost flying in all directions. By the gods, Lyra whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. Nearby, she spotted Rowan Thornheart, her hands glowing with barely contained power. It's a frost fiend, Rowan shouted over the din. They're supposed to be extinct, trapped beyond the great frost barrier. Guards and knights scrambled to form a defensive line, but their weapons seemed to have little effect on the creature's icy hide. With each swipe of its massive claws, more defenders were sent flying, their bodies encased in rapidly forming ice. Lyra's mind raced. This was a pivotal moment, one that could either expose her or cement her place in the court. Making a split-second decision, she raised her sword and charged forward. Lady Nightshade, wait, Rowan called out, but Lyra was already closing the distance to the frost fiend. As she neared the creature, Lyra felt the temperature plummet. Her breath came out in visible puffs, and frost began to form on her armor. Gritting her teeth against the cold, she focused on the power within her sword, channeling her magic through the shadowglass core. The blade began to glow with an eerie, dark light. Lyra leapt, using a fallen cart as a springboard, and brought her sword down in a powerful arc. To the amazement of onlookers, the enchanted blade cut through the frost fiend's icy armor like a hot knife through butter. The creature howled in pain and fury, turning its baleful gaze upon Lyra. She rolled to avoid a retaliatory swipe, coming up beside Rowan, who was unleashing blasts of fire from her hands. We need to hit it together, Lyra shouted. Your fire, my shadows, it might be enough to bring it down. Rowan nodded, a look of determination on her face. On my mark. As the frost fiend lumbered towards them, Rowan began to chant, her voice rising in a crescendo. Flames danced around her, growing in intensity. Lyra, in turn, drew upon the darkest teachings of her family's grimoire. Shadows seemed to coalesce around her sword, writhing and pulsing with barely contained energy. Now, Rowan cried. Their combined assault hit the frost fiend with devastating force. Rowan's inferno melted through its icy defenses, while Lyra's shadow-infused strike pierced its core. For a moment, the creature stood motionless, a look of almost human surprise in its alien eyes. Then, with a sound like 1,000 icicles shattering, it exploded into a shower of rapidly melting fragments. As the last echoes of the battle faded, an eerie silence fell over the tournament grounds. Lyra stood panting, her sword still glowing faintly. She became acutely aware of the hundreds of eyes upon her, some filled with awe, others with fear, and a select few with calculated interest. Prince Darien strode forward, his expression unreadable. Lady Nightshade, Lady Thornheart, he said, his voice carrying across the stunned crowd. It seems we owe you a debt of gratitude, but I think you both have some explaining to do. Before Lyra could respond, a commotion arose from the direction of the royal dais. King Aldrich had collapsed, his frail body apparently overcome by the excitement. As attendants rushed to the king's aid, Lyra caught sight of Lord Cassius Silverspire. The man's face was a mask of concern, but there was a glint in his eyes that sent a chill down Lyra's spine. In that moment, she realized that the battle with the Frost Fiend, as terrifying as it had been, was merely the opening move in a far more complex and dangerous game. The real war for the throne, for justice, for the very soul of the Five Kingdoms was just beginning. And Lyra Blackthorn, the girl who had risen from the ashes of her family's ruin, now stood at its center, her true identity still hidden, but her power undeniably revealed. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but for the first time since that fateful night 5 years ago, Lyra felt the stirrings of true hope. The game had changed, and she was ready to play. The aftermath of the Frost Fiend attack plunged the capital into a maelstrom of fear, speculation, and political maneuvering. King Aldrich, already frail, had fallen into a coma, leaving the kingdom teetering on the brink of crisis. Prince Darien assumed the role of regent, his youthful face etched with the weight of unexpected responsibility. Lyra found herself at the heart of this storm. Her display of power during the battle had earned her both admiration and suspicion. She had been summoned to a private audience with Prince Darien, and as she walked the torch-lit corridors of the palace, her mind raced with possibilities and dangers. The prince's study was an austere room, its walls lined with maps and ancient tomes. Darien stood by a window, his back to her as she entered. "Lady Nightshade," he said without turning, or should I say Lady Blackthorn. Lyra's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her voice steady. "Your Highness is mistaken. I am." "Spare me the pretense," Darien interrupted, finally facing her. His blue eyes were sharp, intelligent. "I've had my suspicions since the tournament began, but your display against the Frost Fiend confirmed them. Only a Blackthorn could wield shadow magic with such skill." For a moment, Lyra considered maintaining her deception, but something in the prince's demeanor gave her pause. Instead, she straightened her spine and met his gaze unflinchingly. "And what does your Highness intend to do with this knowledge?" A hint of a smile played at Darien's lips. "That depends entirely on you, my lady. The kingdom stands on a knife's edge. My father incapacitated, dark creatures emerging from beyond the frost barrier, and factions within the court vying for power. I find myself in need of allies, powerful allies." "And you think the last scion of a disgraced house fits that description?" Lyra asked, arching an eyebrow. "I think," Darien said, taking a step closer, "that you are far more than that. You've managed to infiltrate the highest levels of the court, demonstrating cunning and patience beyond your years. And your command of magic, it's unlike anything I've seen." Lyra's mind whirled with the implications. An alliance with the prince could accelerate her plans for revenge, but it also carried immense risk. "What exactly are you proposing, your Highness?" Darien's expression grew grave. "War is coming, Lady Blackthorn, not just with the creatures beyond the barrier, but within our own borders. The Order of the Burning Star grows stronger by the day, fanning the flames of fear and superstition. And there are other factions at play, moving in the shadows." "Like the one responsible for the Frost Fiend's appearance," Lyra ventured. The prince nodded. "Precisely. I need someone I can trust, someone with the power and the will to help me navigate these treacherous waters. In return, I offer you the full restoration of House Blackthorn and my support in uncovering the truth behind your family's fall." It was a tempting offer, almost too good to be true. Lyra's instincts screamed caution, but the potential rewards were undeniable. "And what of Lord Silverspire?" she asked, unable to keep the edge from her voice. Darien's eyes narrowed. "Cassius Silverspire has been a loyal supporter of the crown for many years. But loyalty, I'm learning, is a complex thing. If he played a role in your family's destruction, justice will be served. You have my word." Before Lyra could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway outside. The door burst open, revealing a guard with a wild look in his eyes. "Your Highness," he gasped. "It's Lady Thornheart. She's been attacked." Darian cursed under his breath. "Where?" "The gardens, my prince. She lives, but—" Lyra was already moving, her earlier caution forgotten in the face of this new threat. As she raced through the palace halls, Darian close on her heels, her mind grappled with the implications. Rowan Thornheart, potential ally, fellow magic user, and now a target. The gardens were a scene of devastation. Hedges had been blasted apart, marble statues lay in ruins, and at the center of it all lay Rowan, her vibrant red hair matted with blood. Lyra knelt beside her, checking for signs of life. "Who did this?" Darian demanded, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. Rowan's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and filled with pain. The faceless one," she whispered. He said, "The game has changed. The queen is awakening." As Rowan slipped back into unconsciousness, Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. The faceless one, the very being who had approached her earlier, now revealed as an enemy. And what queen could inspire such drastic action? Looking up at Prince Darian, Lyra saw her own confusion and fear mirrored in his eyes. The game had indeed changed, and the stakes were higher than ever. Whatever path she chose now would shape not just her fate, but that of the entire kingdom. With a deep breath, Lyra made her decision. "Your Highness," she said, her voice steady and filled with resolve, "I believe we have much to discuss." The courtyard fell into an eerie silence as Lyra and High Inquisitor Malachi faced each other. The tension was palpable, a living thing that seemed to pulse in the air between them. Lyra could feel the eyes of hundreds upon her, some filled with hope, others with fear and disgust. Malachi raised his hands, a large golden amulet gleaming on his chest. "In the name of the one true God, I will purge this evil from our land," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the stone walls. Lyra remained still, her face a mask of calm determination. She knew that this battle would be won not just with magic, but with perception. Every move, every word would shape the narrative of this pivotal moment. Suddenly, Malachi's amulet began to glow with an intense golden light. A beam of energy shot forth, searing the air as it raced towards Lyra. With a fluid motion, she raised her hand, summoning a wall of writhing shadows that absorbed the attack. The crowd gasped. Malachi's eyes widened in shock, but he quickly recovered, launching a barrage of golden bolts. Lyra danced between them, her movements graceful and precise. Where her feet touched the ground, tendrils of darkness spread outward. "Your parlor tricks cannot stand against the might of true faith," Malachi snarled, his face contorted with rage. Lyra's voice was calm, carrying clearly across the courtyard. "Is it faith that drives you, Inquisitor, or is it fear? Fear of that which you do not understand?" As she spoke, she wove a complex pattern in the air. The shadows around her coalesced into a swarm of ethereal ravens. They darted towards Malachi, who frantically tried to bat them away with bursts of golden light. The battle raged on, a mesmerizing dance of light and shadow. Lyra could feel the tide of the crowd's emotion shifting. Where once there had been hostility, now there was a growing sense of awe. Malachi, sensing his advantage slipping away, grew desperate. With a guttural cry, he channeled a massive surge of power through his amulet. The golden light expanded into a blinding nova, threatening to engulf everything in its path. Time seemed to slow for Lyra. In that moment, she reached deep within herself, tapping into the wellspring of power that was her birthright as a Blackthorn. The shadows around her deepened, taking on an almost liquid quality. As Malachi's attack rushed towards her, Lyra raised both hands, palms outward. The wave of golden energy crashed against her defense like a storm-tossed sea against an immovable cliff. For a heartbeat, it seemed as though the light would overwhelm her. But then, with a sound like shattering glass, Malachi's attack broke. Shards of golden light scattered across the courtyard, harmlessly dissipating into motes of glittering dust. The High Inquisitor stood, chest heaving, his face a mask of disbelief. His amulet, once brilliant, now hung dull and lifeless around his neck. Lyra took a step forward, her voice ringing out clear and strong. "Your God has not struck me down, Inquisitor. Perhaps it's time to consider that your understanding of the divine might be, incomplete. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Malachi's followers looked to their leader, uncertainty clear on their faces. In that moment of hesitation, Prince Darien seized the opportunity. He strode forward, his voice carrying the weight of royal authority. The trial by combat is concluded. Lady Lyra has proven herself to be not a threat to the realm, but a protector. He turned to address the assembled crowd. For too long, we have allowed fear to divide us. But today, we have witnessed the true power of magic, not as a force of destruction, but as a shield against the darkness that threatens our kingdom. Lyra watched as Darien's words took hold. The fear and hostility in the crowd began to give way to something new hope, and the first stirrings of unity. But even as a sense of victory began to settle over her, Lyra's instincts screamed a warning. Her eyes scanned the crowd, settling on a hooded figure at its edge. For just a moment, the figure's face seemed to shift and change the faceless one. Their eyes met, and Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. The shapeshifter's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth, only promise. A promise that this was far from over. As quickly as it had appeared, the faceless one vanished into the crowd. Lyra's mind raced with implications. The battle against the Order had been won, but it was clear that a far greater threat still loomed. Prince Darien approached, his eyes shining with a mixture of relief and newfound respect. "You've done it, Lady Lyra. You've given us a chance to reshape the kingdom." Lyra nodded, but her expression remained grave. "We've won a battle, Your Highness, but I fear the war is only just beginning." As the crowd began to disperse, their excited chatter filling the air, Lyra's gaze was drawn to the distant horizon. Beyond the city walls, beyond the great frost barrier, something ancient and terrible was stirring. The true test of her power and of the kingdom's resolve still lay ahead. With a deep breath, Lyra steeled herself for the challenges to come. The path forward was uncertain, fraught with danger from enemies both known and hidden. But for the first time since the fall of House Blackthorn, she felt truly ready to face whatever fate had in store. The game had changed, and Lyra Blackthorn, the Ashen Queen, was prepared to play it to its bitter end. In the days following Lyra's victory over High Inquisitor Malachi, the capital was abuzz with change. The Order of the Burning Star's influence waned, and whispers of a new era filled the air. Prince Darien, emboldened by the shift in public opinion, began implementing reforms that would have been unthinkable mere weeks ago. Lyra, now openly acknowledged as Lady Blackthorn, found herself at the centre of a political maelstrom. Nobles who had once shunned her now sought her favour, while others watched her with wary eyes, unsure of where this powerful young woman fit in the new order. But even as she navigated the treacherous waters of court politics, Lyra's mind was consumed by greater concerns. The appearance of the Frost Fiend, Rowan's cryptic warning about an awakening queen, and the continued presence of the enigmatic Faceless, one all pointed to a looming threat far beyond the petty squabbles of the nobility. It was during a private meeting with Prince Darien that these concerns came to a head. They stood in the royal library, surrounded by ancient tomes and flickering candlelight. "We've received reports from the northern outposts," Darien said, his voice grim as he unrolled a map on the table before them. "The great frost barrier is weakening. Scouts have seen more creatures like the Frost Fiend gathering beyond it." Lyra's brow furrowed as she studied the map. "It's happening faster than we anticipated. Do we know what's causing the barrier's decay?" Darien shook his head. "Our knowledge of the barrier's magic is limited. It was created generations ago, in the time of the first kings. Much of that lore has been lost." "Or hidden," Lyra mused. She reached into her cloak, producing her family's grimoire. "I've been studying this, trying to unlock its secrets. There are references to a power that once held the frost at bay, something called the Everflame." The prince's eyes widened. "I've heard that term before in old stories. A source of magic so potent it could push back the endless winter, but it was lost or extinguished long ago." Before Lyra could respond, the library doors burst open. Thomas rushed in, his young face pale with urgency. "My lady, Your Highness, Lady Thornheart has awoken, and she brings dire news." They hurried to Rowan's chambers, where they found the red-haired woman sitting up in bed, her green eyes wild with barely contained panic. "The Queen," she gasped as soon as she saw them. "The Ice Queen stirs in her frozen throne. I saw her in my dreams, reaching out across the barrier. She seeks the Everflame, to snuff it out once and for all." Lyra and Darian exchanged a look of grave understanding. "If this Ice Queen extinguishes the Everflame," Lyra said slowly, "there will be nothing left to hold back the frost. The 5 kingdoms will fall." Rowan nodded weakly. "We must find it first. The Everflame is our only hope." "But where do we even begin to look?" Darian asked, frustration evident in his voice. "If it still exists, it's been hidden for centuries." Lyra's mind raced, pieces of a puzzle falling into place. "The Faceless One," she said suddenly. "He's been manipulating events, playing all sides. He must know something about the Everflame's location." "And how do you propose we find a shapeshifter who doesn't want to be found?" Rowan asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. A slow smile spread across Lyra's face. "We don't find him. We make him come to us." She turned to Darian. "Your Highness, I believe it's time we announced a royal expedition, one that will take us beyond the Great Frost Barrier." Darian's eyebrows shot up. "That's madness. The people will never support such a risk." "They will if we frame it right," Lyra countered. "A bold mission to save the kingdom, led by the heroic prince and the magical Lady Blackthorn. It's the stuff of legends." "And bait for our elusive shapeshifter," Rowan added, catching on to Lyra's plan. Darian paced the room, weighing the proposal. Finally, he nodded. "It's dangerous, but you're right. We're out of options and time. I'll make the announcement tomorrow." As they began to plan the details of their expedition, Lyra felt a mixture of excitement and dread. They were about to embark on a journey into the unknown, facing dangers beyond imagination. But within that danger lay the key to saving not just the 5 kingdoms, but perhaps to unlocking the full potential of her own power. Outside the castle walls, a cold wind began to blow from the north. In the shadowy recesses of the city, a figure with ever-changing features smiled to himself. The game was entering its final phase, and soon the true nature of the Everflame would be revealed. Little did Lyra know that her greatest test, and the ultimate truth about her family's legacy, awaited her beyond the Great Frost Barrier. The Ashen Queen's rise was about to reach its crescendo, with the fate of the entire world hanging in the balance. The announcement of the royal expedition sent shockwaves through the 5 kingdoms. Some hailed it as a heroic quest to save the realm, while others decried it as a fool's errand. Regardless of public opinion, preparations moved forward at a feverish pace. Lyra found herself at the heart of these preparations, her days a whirlwind of strategy meetings, magical research, and intense training. She pushed herself to the limit, honing her shadow magic to a razor's edge. The grimoire of House Blackthorn rarely left her side, its pages yielding new secrets with each passing day. One crisp morning, as dawn broke over the capital, Lyra stood atop the castle's highest tower. Her eyes were fixed on the distant horizon, where the shimmering veil of the Great Frost Barrier was visible even from this distance. She sensed a presence behind her and spoke without turning. "You're up early, Your Highness." Prince Darian moved to stand beside her, his face etched with the weight of their impending journey. "As are you, Lady Blackthorn. Troubled sleep?" Lyra nodded, her expression pensive. "I keep dreaming of ice and darkness, and whispers, voices I can't quite understand." Darian's brow furrowed with concern. "Do you think it's her, the Ice Queen?" "Perhaps," Lyra murmured. "Or perhaps it's something older. Something tied to the very magic that flows through my veins." She turned to face the prince, her eyes glinting with determination. "But whatever it is, we'll face it together." A smile tugged at Darian's lips. "Indeed we will. The final preparations are complete. We ride at noon." As they descended from the tower, the castle was a hive of activity. Soldiers donned enchanted armor, their weapons blessed by what few magic users remained in the kingdom. Supplies were loaded onto sturdy northern horses, bred to withstand the bitter cold beyond the barrier. In the main courtyard, Lyra found Rowan Thornheart deep in conversation with a group of battle-hardened rangers. The redhead's recovery had been remarkable, her innate magic accelerating the healing process. She nodded to Lyra as she approached. "Lady Blackthorn," Rowan said, her voice tinged with respect. "I was just briefing our scouts on what to expect beyond the barrier. Not that any of us truly know what awaits us there." Lyra's hand instinctively went to the hilt of her shadowglass sword. "We'll face it as it comes. Have you had any more visions?" Rowan shook her head, frustration evident in her green eyes. "Nothing clear, just a sense of urgency. Whatever's happening up there, it's accelerating." As noon approached, the expedition gathered at the city gates. Hundreds had turned out to see them off, the crowd a mix of cheering supporters and anxious faces. Prince Darien addressed the gathering, his voice carrying across the square. "People of the 5 kingdoms, we embark today on a journey to safeguard our future. The threat that looms beyond the great frost barrier is real, but so is our resolve. With courage, unity, and the blessings of those we leave behind, we shall return victorious." A cheer went up from the crowd, but Lyra's attention was drawn to a hooded figure at its edge. For a brief moment, the figure's features seemed to shimmer and change. The faceless one. Their eyes met, and Lyra felt a chill that had nothing to do with the northern wind. The shapeshifter nodded once, almost imperceptibly, before melting back into the throng. As the gates opened and the expedition moved out, Lyra's mind raced. The faceless one's presence confirmed that their plan was working, but it also meant that the game was far from over. Whatever secrets lay hidden in the frozen wasteland beyond the barrier, she knew that the shapeshifter would be there, pulling strings from the shadows. The first leg of their journey was uneventful, the familiar landscapes of the kingdom giving way to increasingly rugged terrain. But as they drew closer to the great frost barrier, the air grew colder, and an oppressive silence fell over the land. On the evening of the 3rd day, they made camp within sight of the barrier itself. It stretched across the horizon, a shimmering curtain of magical energy that pulsed with an otherworldly light. Lyra stood at the edge of the camp, her eyes fixed on the barrier, when Tomas approached. "My lady," the boy said, his voice hushed with awe and fear. "Do you really think we can do this? Save the kingdom, I mean." Lyra placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, even as doubt gnawed at her own heart. "We have to try, Tomas. Sometimes that's all we can do." As night fell and the camp settled into an uneasy sleep, Lyra remained awake, her mind filled with visions of what lay ahead. The barrier loomed before them, a threshold between the world they knew and a realm of ancient magic and terrible danger. In the darkness, Lyra whispered a promise to herself and to the memory of her fallen family. Whatever trials awaited beyond the great frost barrier, whatever secrets the Ice Queen held, and whatever game the Faceless One was playing, she would see it through. The Ashen Queen would rise, and the true power of House Blackthorn would be unleashed upon the world once more. As the first light of dawn touched the barrier, casting it in shades of fire and ice, Lyra knew that their greatest challenge was about to begin. The fate of the 5 kingdoms hung in the balance, and the time for hesitation was over. With a deep breath, she prepared to lead the expedition into the unknown, ready to face whatever destiny awaited them in the frozen wastes beyond. The crossing of the great frost barrier was unlike anything Lyra had ever experienced. As they passed through the shimmering veil, a bone-deep cold seized them, and the very air seemed to crystallize with each breath. The world beyond was a vast expanse of white, broken only by jagged spires of ice that reached toward a colorless sky. Prince Darien, his face half hidden behind a fur-lined hood, turned to Lyra with wide eyes. "By the gods," he whispered, his voice muffled by the howling wind. "It's as if we've stepped into another world entirely." Lyra nodded grimly, her senses on high alert. The magic here was different, ancient and wild. She could feel it pulling at her, whispering secrets just beyond her understanding. "Stay close," she called out to the expedition, "and be ready for anything." They pressed on through the desolate landscape, the horses struggling against the knee-deep snow. Rowan rode beside Lyra, her fiery hair a stark contrast to the endless white. "There's power here," she murmured, green eyes scanning the horizon. Old power. Can you feel it? Before Lyra could respond, a blood-curdling screech split the air. From behind a nearby ice spire, a creature emerged, part wolf, part bird, its body covered in razor-sharp icicles. More appeared, surrounding the expedition in a matter of moments. "Frost wraiths!" someone shouted. Chaos erupted as the creatures attacked. Lyra's shadowglass sword sang as she drew it, the blade trailing wisps of darkness that seemed to drink in the surrounding light. She moved with fluid grace, her magic amplified by the raw power of this frozen realm. Beside her, Rowan unleashed blasts of fire, the heat creating a dizzying fog as it met the frigid air. Prince Darien fought with unexpected skill, his enchanted blade glowing with a warm, golden light that seemed to repel the creatures. As Lyra dispatched another frost wraith, she caught sight of a hooded figure on a distant ridge. The Faceless One. Their eyes met across the battlefield, and for a moment time seemed to stand still. The shapeshifter raised a hand, pointing to the north before vanishing into the swirling snow. With a final, coordinated effort, the expedition drove off the remaining frost wraiths. As they regrouped, tending to the wounded and calming the frightened horses, Lyra approached Darien and Rowan. "The Faceless One was here," she said in a low voice. "He pointed north. I think he's leading us to something." Darien's brow furrowed. "Can we trust his guidance? This could be a trap." Rowan shook her head. "We don't have much choice. This wasteland all looks the same. We could wander for weeks and find nothing." "Agreed," Lyra said. "But we proceed with caution. The game is far from over." They pressed on northward, the landscape growing ever more treacherous. Great chasms opened in the ice without warning, and strange, ethereal lights danced in the distance, luring the unwary to their doom. Through it all, Lyra felt a growing sense of anticipation, as if every step was bringing them closer to a moment of profound revelation. On the 5th day beyond the barrier, as a bitter gale threatened to tear the flesh from their bones, they saw it. Rising from the endless white was a mountain of pure ice, its surface faceted like an enormous diamond, and there, carved into its very heart, stood a palace of such impossible beauty that it took their breath away. "The throne of winter," Rowan whispered, awe and fear mingling in her voice. "The seat of the Ice Queen's power." As they stood transfixed by the sight, a figure materialized before them, the Faceless One, his features shifting like smoke. "Well done," he said, his voice carrying despite the howling wind. "You've come further than I dared hope." Lyra's hand tightened on her sword. "Enough games. Tell us what you know about the Everflame." The Faceless One's lips curled into a smile that held no warmth. "The Everflame is not a thing, Lady Blackthorn. It is a person. It is you." A shocked silence fell over the group. Lyra felt as if the ground had dropped out from beneath her. "What are you talking about?" "The power that flows through your veins, the legacy of House Blackthorn. It is the last ember of the Everflame, hidden and protected through generations. And now, at last, it has awakened." As the implications of his words sank in, a tremor ran through the icy ground. The palace before them shuddered, and a voice like cracking glaciers echoed across the wasteland. "So," it said, "ancient and terrible. The final piece arrives. Come then, little flame. Let us see if you burn bright enough to challenge the eternal winter." The Ice Queen had awakened, and the final battle for the fate of the 5 kingdoms was about to begin. Lyra Blackthorn, the unwitting bearer of the Everflame, stood at the precipice of her destiny. As she gazed up at the towering ice palace, she knew that whatever came next would change not just her life, but the very fabric of the world itself. With a deep breath, Lyra took her first step toward the throne of winter, the power of the Everflame stirring within her. The endgame had begun. The ascent to the throne of winter was treacherous, the path a winding spiral of ice that threatened to shatter beneath their feet with each step. Lyra led the way, her body thrumming with a newfound energy that she now recognized as the Everflame's power. Behind her, Prince Darien, Rowan, and a select few of their bravest companions followed, while the rest of the expedition maintained a defensive position at the base of the ice mountain. The Faceless One had vanished once more, but his revelation echoed in Lyra's mind. She was the Everflame, the very thing they had set out to find. But what did that mean? And how could she use this power to stop the Ice Queen? As they neared the entrance to the palace, a biting wind picked up, carrying with it shards of ice that cut like tiny blades. Rowan raised her hands, creating a shimmering barrier of heat that deflected the worst of it. "Lyra," she called out, her voice strained with effort, "whatever happens in there, remember who you are. The power of the Everflame has been part of you all along. Trust in it." Lyra nodded, grateful for the reminder. She turned to address the group, her voice carrying an authority she scarcely recognized. "Whatever we face beyond these doors, we face it together. For the 5 kingdoms, for all those we left behind, we cannot fail." With a shared look of determination, they stepped into the Ice Queen's domain. The interior of the palace was a marvel of crystalline architecture, with soaring arches and delicate spirals that seemed to defy the laws of nature. But there was a wrongness to it, all a sense of ancient malevolence that permeated the very air. They had barely taken a dozen steps when the attack came. Ice sculptures sprang to life, their faceted bodies gleaming as they lunged forward with deadly precision. Lyra's shadowglass sword sang as she met their assault, the blade leaving trails of darkness that seemed to melt the animated ice. Darien and the others fought valiantly, but it quickly became clear that they were outmatched. For every ice construct they shattered, 2 more took its place. "Go!" Darien shouted to Lyra, parrying a blow from a particularly massive ice warrior. "Find the Ice Queen. End this. We'll hold them off as long as we can." Lyra hesitated for a split second, torn between her duty and her desire to protect her friends. But she knew Darien was right. With a nod of acknowledgement, she turned and raced deeper into the palace, following an instinct she couldn't quite name. The corridors twisted and turned, a maddening labyrinth of ice and shadow. But with each step, Lyra felt the pull of something ancient and powerful. The Everflame within her surged, guiding her path. At last she emerged into a vast chamber. At its center stood a throne of ice, and upon it sat a figure of such terrible beauty that it took Lyra's breath away. The Ice Queen was a creature of living frost, her eyes deep pools of winter's fury. "So," the Queen's voice resonated through the chamber, "the last ember of the Everflame comes to challenge me. How? Quaint." Lyra stood her ground, her sword at the ready. "I've come to end your threat to the 5 kingdoms. The eternal winter ends today." A laugh like breaking icicles filled the air. "Foolish child, do you not see? I am eternal. I am the cold that waits at the end of all things. Your little flame is nothing but a dying spark in the face of my power." With a gesture, the Ice Queen sent a wave of freezing energy hurtling toward Lyra. She raised her sword instinctively, and to her amazement, the blade absorbed the attack, glowing with an inner fire. "Impossible," the Queen hissed, rising from her throne. Lyra felt the Everflame roar to life within her, filling her with a warmth that banished all fear. "You're wrong," she said, her voice steady and strong. "The Everflame is not just a spark. It's the fire that burns in the heart of every living thing. The warmth of hope, of love, of life itself. And as long as there's life, there will always be fire to push back the dark." With those words, Lyra let go of all restraint. The power of the Everflame exploded from her in a nova of heat and light. The Ice Queen shrieked, a sound of fury and disbelief, as the very foundations of her frozen realm began to melt. The battle that followed was cataclysmic. Ice and fire clashed in a display of raw elemental fury. Lyra moved with a grace and power she had never known, the Everflame guiding her every action. The Ice Queen fought with the desperate rage of a dying age, unleashing blizzards and hailstorms of unimaginable force. As their conflict reached its peak, Lyra realized the truth. This was not just a battle for the 5 kingdoms, but for the balance of the world itself. With a final monumental effort, she plunged her shadowglass sword into the heart of the Ice Queen's power. There was a moment of absolute stillness, and then the world exploded in light and heat. Lyra felt herself falling, the ice palace crumbling around her. As consciousness slipped away, she caught a glimpse of a familiar, ever-changing face. The faceless one reached out, a look of triumph in his eyes, and then darkness took her. When Lyra awoke, she found herself back at the base of the mountain, surrounded by her battered but alive companions. The great frost barrier was gone, and a warm wind blew from the north for the first time in centuries. As they began the long journey home, Lyra knew that this was not an end, but a beginning. The world was changing, magic was returning, and the Ashen Queen had only just begun to realize her true potential. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them with the fire of hope burning bright within her heart. The return journey to the capital was marked by a sense of profound change. As news of their victory spread, people flocked to see the heroes who had vanquished the Ice Queen and brought an end to the threat of eternal winter. Lyra, still grappling with her newfound identity as the bearer of the Everflame, found herself the object of awe and reverence. As they approached the city gates, Lyra turned to Prince Darien. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice low enough that only he could hear. Darien's eyes were thoughtful as he surveyed the cheering crowds. "We rebuild. We adapt. The world is changing, Lyra, and we must change with it." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity. King Aldrich, miraculously recovered from his mysterious ailment, abdicated the throne in favor of his son. Darien's coronation was a spectacle of unity, with representatives from all corners of the 5 kingdoms in attendance. Lyra stood by his side throughout it all, her presence a symbol of the new era dawning. The ban on magic was officially lifted, and a new council was formed to guide its responsible use and study. Rowan Thornheart took a leading role in this, her expertise invaluable in navigating the influx of awakening magical talents across the land. But even as the kingdom celebrated and rebuilt, Lyra felt a growing unease. The Faceless One had vanished without a trace, and the true extent of his machinations remained a mystery. And there were nights when Lyra would wake, her body burning with the power of the Everflame, visions of other realms dancing at the edges of her consciousness. It was on one such night, a month after their return, that Lyra found herself in the palace gardens. The moon hung low and full, casting everything in a silvery glow. As she walked among the blooming flowers, a familiar voice spoke from the shadows. "Well done, Ashen Queen. You've played your part admirably." Lyra spun, her hand instinctively going to her sword. The Faceless One emerged from behind a statue, his features settling into a face she had never seen before, handsome, ageless, with eyes that held the wisdom of centuries. "What game are you playing?" Lyra demanded. "Why go to all this trouble? Why me?" The Faceless One smiled, a gesture both warm and enigmatic. "The Ice Queen was but one threat among many, my dear. The world is vast, and the barriers between realms grow thin. You were chosen because the blood of the first flame runs through your veins. You are a key, Lyra Blackthorn, to locks you cannot yet imagine." Before Lyra could respond, he continued, "Your journey is far from over. Even now, forces beyond your comprehension stir. The Everflame within you is a beacon, drawing the attention of beings both wondrous and terrible." Lyra's mind reeled with the implications. "Are you saying there are more threats like the Ice Queen out there? And allies and wonders beyond your wildest dreams?" The Faceless One's form began to shimmer, as if he were fading from reality. "Prepare yourself, Ashen Queen. The game of gods and monsters has only just begun." With those words, he vanished, leaving Lyra alone with her thoughts and the weight of destiny on her shoulders. In the days that followed, Lyra threw herself into her studies with renewed vigor. She delved into the most ancient texts in the royal library, seeking any information on the realms beyond their own. She trained relentlessly, pushing the limits of her connection to the Everflame. Prince, now King Darien, noticed the change in her. "You're preparing for something," he observed one evening as they walked the palace battlements. Lyra nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon. "There's more out there, Darien, more than we ever imagined, and I have a feeling we're going to be at the center of it all." Darien took her hand, his touch a comfort in the face of the unknown. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The 5 kingdoms stand united, and you, my Ashen Queen, have proven that even the darkest winter can be overcome." As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of fire that reminded her of the power flowing through her veins, Lyra allowed herself a moment of peace. She had risen from the ashes of her family's ruin, reclaimed her heritage, and saved a kingdom. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever new players entered the cosmic game, she would meet them head on. for she was Lyra Blackthorn, the Ashen Queen, bearer of the Everflame, and her story, she knew, was far from over.